Hello and Ram Ram. Welcome to the third video in the India Way Explained series. Today we cover the third chapter, Krishna's Choice. The introduction today isn't going to be long. This chapter is quite easy to digest. I'd say it's easily the most relatable and understandable chapter if you're an Indian. Even if you're not, it doesn't prove too much of a hurdle to complete. I hope you have as much fun watching this video as I had fun making it. As always, if you enjoy my videos or find them helpful, hit the like and subscribe button. That said, on to the video. The multipolar world today is characterized by frenemies, balance of power and clash of values, presenting a challenge for global politics. These very same characteristics also defined India during a period that is best captured in a powerful epic many of us are familiar with. Quick explainer. Frenemies are rivals who share friendly relations, usually because the relationship has certain benefits for the parties involved. Balance of power is at its core a theory that states countries are invested in ensuring no one side becomes so dominant as to upend the existing arrangement and threaten their position in the world. As India rises, questions about the kind of power it will be are sure to crop up. The world's experience with China will prompt such questions if all else fails. In fact, that is a question that Indians should ask themselves. Part of the answer to this question may lie in India's own history and traditions. Up until very recently, a Western paradigm has dictated the norms and values of the world we live in. The first non-Western power to rise in the post-1945 era has been China, drawing on its cultural heritage to project its personality and shape the narrative. It is logical that India follows its example. If there are hurdles or obstacles to understanding India's viewpoints, it is a result of the ignorance of its indigenous thought processes. This is not surprising given that much of the West has been historically dismissive of our society. The standard American introduction to Indian strategic thought does not even refer to the Mahabharata, despite the epic being a deep influence on the average Indian mind. Imagine commenting in such a manner on Western strategic thought. No mention of Homer's Iliad or Machiavelli's The Prince in such an introduction. Imagine a similar situation but with China. No mention of the three kingdoms in an introduction to their strategic thought. This happening to India has more to do with our, quote, limited global salience, end quote, limited global prominence or importance than it does with our oral tradition. Why does this need rectification or correction, you may ask? Because a more multicultural appreciation is one sign of a multipolar world. Because many of the problems India and the world faces have parallels in, quote, the greatest story ever told, end quote. Producing explanations is central to the process of rising in the global hierarchy. India's rise is often framed in terms of it being a Western or Eastern power. This is due to the underlying Eurocentric assumption that pluralism is a solely Western attribute. India, with a longer history of diversity and coexistence, defies this preconception, an opinion formed before having the evidence for its truth or usefulness. A second debate revolves around nationalism and globalism. Here, once again, India occupies a position that seeks to reconcile or find the sweet spot between these two themes that others see as antithetical concepts, opposite concepts. A nationalistic India is therefore willing to do more with the world, not less. What makes the Indian tradition of statecraft different from others is the approach it takes to governance and diplomacy. Indian history is witness to the fact that it does not follow a winner-takes-all approach when it comes to disputes. It also shows that belief in ends justify the means is absent. On the contrary, the Indian narrative highlights the fairness of outcomes with moderation and nuance being subtle difference, playing an important role in facilitating it. The minister states that reality not always living up to such a standard does not invalidate or disprove the concept. There is a continuous, serious thought given to both goals and processes, sometimes to the point of self-doubt. What it ultimately boils down to is the importance of making the right choices in difficult situations. The clearest distillation of Indian thoughts on statecraft is the Mahabharata. It is not like the Arthashastra, which is a collection of principles of governance. No, it is a graphic account of real-life situations and the choices that come part and parcel of it. As an epic, it dwarfs its counterparts in other civilizations in richness and complexity as well as length. It focuses on the importance of the sense of duty and the sanctity, extreme importance of obligations. It is also a description of human frailties, the condition of being weak and delicate, the dilemmas making a tough choice between two or more alternatives, of statecraft such as taking risks, placing trust and making sacrifices permeate or are spread throughout the story. Quote, "The courage required to implement policy is perhaps its most famous section, the Bhagavad Gita." End quote. There are other elements of politics as well. Tactical compromises, utilizing obsessive players, undertaking regime change, and ensuring balance of power. India's current concerns are also to be found in this tale, especially leveraging the external environment to address bilateral imbalances. Try saying that in one go, LOL. The minister is talking about taking advantage of the external environment, the environment in the world outside India, to solve imbalances in state-to-state relationships. The generally accepted theory of strategic competition and gaming the system coexist with more contemporary concepts of controlling the narrative and valuing knowledge as power. अब सुन के तो अच्छा लगा, पर मंत्री बोलना क्या चाहते हैं? Strategic competition is effectively a competition between two countries where both try to gain an advantage over the other across domains, usually to secure their own interests. Everything from space to military to economic. A good example we have been covering in this series is the US-China competition. Gaming the system is manipulating the system to your advantage. Mantri ji, therefore, is saying that these two concepts that have had wide acceptance for a long time are existing alongside more modern concepts of controlling the narrative and valuing knowledge as power. अब इतने ज्ञान के बाद भी लाइक ठोक के सब्सक्राइब ना किए तो तुम्हारे घर पे आके रात के 12 बजे ढिंचैक पूजा का रैप बजाऊंगा। सच बोल रहा हूं भाई, लाइक ठोको, सब्सक्राइब करो। मूविंग ऑन, द महाभारता contains an account of debates and decisions made against the background of a competition that becomes a conflict. The global situation today may not be as catastrophic as the situation of the epic, but it nevertheless has some elements of similarity that contain lessons for decision making in the present. The India of the Mahabharata era was also multipolar, a world where multiple power centers exist, with its leading powers balancing each other. Once competition between its two major poles or powers could no longer be contained, others were inevitably forced to take sides. There may be no reason to suggest that a literal repetition is occurring today, but the manner in which costs and benefits were assessed and considered by interested parties is useful for all students of strategy today. Much like the landscapes, similarity exists between the choices made then and choices made today. The choices made by Sri Krishna, who provides strategic guidance, diplomatic energy, and tactical wisdom in navigating challenges, are significant. The best known dilemma of the Mahabharata is the implementation of key policies without being discouraged by the collateral consequences of the action, acting on key policies without feeling bad about the unintended outcomes caused by such an action. The example of this is of Arjuna, the most accomplished Pandava warrior, entering the battlefield. Suffering from a crisis of confidence, he is unable to find the determination to take on kinfolk, his own relatives, who stand, quote, ranged against his interests, end quote. While he is eventually persuaded by Lord Krishna to do his duty, there are underlying features to his behavior that apply to state players in international relations today. This is not a suggestion to disregard cost-benefit analysis. However, quote, sometimes even when there is a pathway, it may not be due to lack of resolve or a fear of costs, end quote. Unlike Arjuna, we in India are more intimidated by the fear of the unknown rather than the comfort of the known. In today's world, the expression of soft state is used to describe a nation's unwillingness or inability to do what is necessary. In Arjuna's case, it certainly wasn't a situation of inability. This sometimes is the predicament of the Indian state as well. For example, in a long fight against terrorism, we are constrained or restricted by a lack of imagination and fear of risks. This may have started to change, but it is important to learn to match the level of resolve shown by others. Quote, Arjuna eventually takes the field as a righteous warrior, and that sense of self-justification is important to recognize. End quote. Only when the national elite have a strong and proven sense of their bottom lines, the most important factors in any situation, can they be expected to take a firm stand when these are challenged. So, whether an issue of sovereignty being violated or an infringement of borders, the ability to respond categorically in an unambiguous way can come from this inherent self-belief. The dharma of a state, much like the dharma of an individual warrior, is of asserting national interests and securing strategic goals through various means. This needs to be understood especially well in a climate where judgments are sometimes made on the basis of popularity rather than strategy. Relevant to this context is summoning the willpower to address concerns rather than rationalize inaction by highlighting the costs of action. We have all heard arguments stating that a competitor is too big to challenge, that they will prevail in the end anyway, or that the very nature of a neighbor is to indulge in terrorism and we simply have to live with it. This is fatalism disguised as deliberation. The message in Arjuna's choice is that we have to face our responsibilities, however difficult its consequences. India's national security would have been in a significantly better position if this had been more widely appreciated and practiced. Another similarity between the world today and the world of the Mahabharata is that of constraints or restrictions that operate on competitors. In the era of the epic, these constraints originated from a range of human emotions, different of course from those that apply today. They were driven in part by a belief that the very nature of conflict is destructive to the interests of all parties involved. Given this, there was a reluctance or unwillingness to initiate it among the Kaurava elders, and even more so with King Yudhishthira. His brother Arjuna even carries this feeling with him into the battlefield. This reluctance was intensified by sentiments from past relationships clashing with the requirements of future interest. The patriarch Bhishma and the teacher Drona both display enormous reluctance to bring their full capability into play against their previous wards. A ward is a child or young person under the care of a guardian. The constraints of today are far more structural and less behavioral. Nuclear deterrence is one factor. Markets reacting negatively to tension, leave alone conflict, means that economic interdependence is another strong factor. A more technological world is a world that is a lot more vulnerable, even if it has created greater capabilities. The range of options open earlier have steadily shrunk with the passage of time. Even in India's case, the scale of earlier conflicts that took place can no longer be thought of as realistic. All countries plan for worst case scenarios, but the reality is one of increasingly severe responses, narrow windows, and limited application. It shifts the focus from the need of building strong overall capabilities to the need to develop mind games that are more relevant to likely scenarios, even if it does not do away with the former. Because responses can be swift and severe, and hard options like, say, declaration of war has limited application, the focus has shifted from building up a country's overall capability to focusing on developing strategies of manipulative behavior intended to gain an advantage against a competitor, win the tussle without firing a shot. If there is one power that a rising power should cultivate, it is that of displaying responsibility. The way in which Arjuna finally took up arms at Kurukshetra highlighted his forbearance or self-control as well as his devotion to duty. According to the minister, in this sense, he was a reluctant warrior. In a different way, so too was Sri Krishna. His willingness to forgive his cousin and rival Shishupala for 100 provocations before responding decisively is informative. This too is a lesson for a country with growing capabilities. Power, as it grows, must be debated, projected, and applied judiciously or wisely. India has rarely faced this dilemma till now. Most of the conflicts in its modern era have been defensive wars where the justification is mostly self-evident or obvious. However, recent events have shown the need to cultivate the strategic patience required for more modern-day Shishupalas. India is better off without irresponsible talk at this stage in its rise. Use of force must never be the first option, but always the considered or carefully thought of option. Superpowers like the US discovered the damage caused by the contrary approach in places like Iraq. Major nations have multiple weapons in their armory, and blunt ones are typically the least productive. However, imagery is no less significant than the hard option in terms of effectiveness. Those who casually advocate for the application of force abroad do damage. The Mahabharata tells us that such actions are an option reserved for imminent danger or serial offenders. Most strategists fight the last war, not the next war. In this context, Arjuna makes a significant choice sometime before the battle begins. He and his rival cousin Duryodhana went to Sri Krishna's capital, Dwarka, to seek his support as an ally in the upcoming war. Though Arjuna arrived after Duryodhana, he was seen first by Sri Krishna as he awakened. This due to his seating being at the foot of the bed. When asked to choose between Sri Krishna's army or his personal participation without weapons, Arjuna, surprising Duryodhana, opted for the latter. Quote, his understanding of the game-changing potential of Sri Krishna was clearly the basis for his decision. End quote. This lesson is important for India as it considers enhancing competitiveness, being as good or better than others, in national security. Like most warriors, Duryodhana thought in an orthodox manner, while his cousin Arjuna understood what was out of the box. He understood the significance of the heterodox or unorthodox solution. It is critical India prepare itself better for what awaits the world without neglecting the areas in which it has established capability. A world seeing advancements in artificial intelligence, robotics, and data analytics or sensing, advanced materials, and surveillance. It is imperative or absolutely crucial that an informed and modern assessment of capabilities be made if leveraging other states is central to success. Quote, Arjuna understood what Sri Krishna was about. Duryodhana did not. End quote. The point we discussed wasn't simply about understanding the big picture incorrectly, but also about failing to appreciate what is at hand, what is available. Duryodhana was oblivious or unaware to the significance of Shri Krishna. If he wasn't, he would not have underestimated him for his lack of weapons. Quote, understanding the full value of capabilities is as important as building them. The Pandavas clearly scored better in both departments. End quote. India today needs to focus on playing its cards well, in addition to paying attention to the quality of the cards it has been handed. Relations between states are based on rules and norms. Even if the rules and norms are breached from time to time, there is always a larger societal expectations that exceptions will remain exceptions. All players use traditions and practices to their advantage, and it is no different in the Mahabharata. Quote, the archery teacher Drona takes the thumb of a talented student Eklavya as the ritual offering to the master, since he could otherwise overshadow his favorite Arjuna. The god Indra, disguised as a Brahmin, seeks the invulnerable armor and earrings of the Kaurava general Karna after prayers, as it is the only time of the day when he cannot refuse him a favor. Arjuna uses a reincarnated woman as cover in battle, knowing full well that Bhishma will not fire back because of gender sensitivity. End quote. In a world being violently split apart by trade disputes, technology fights, and connectivity differences, it is of some consolation to know that not playing by the rules has a long history. If players seek unintended benefits or attempt to game the system, it is not the first time that this path has seen foot traffic. The Mahabharata holds many examples of violations of codes of conduct, some of which are more flagrant than others. Quote, Duryodhana is killed literally with a blow below the belt. Of the successive Kaurava commanders, one is brought down using a woman warrior as a shield, the second attacked after laying down weapons, and the third decapitated when digging his chariot wheel out of the ground. End quote. Well-laid rules of individual combat are watered down or fast forgotten as the stakes mount. Arjuna's son Abhimanyu is attacked by multiple adversaries simultaneously, including from his rear. His father Arjuna breaks the rules by assaulting Bhurishrava when Bhurishrava is engaged in a fight with his long-standing rival Satyaki to save Satyaki. Quote, such deviations provided the justification for the most terrible act of the conflict, the nighttime slaughter of the sleeping victors of the war by Drona's son Ashwathama at the end of the war in revenge against the manner of his father's killing. End quote. These examples frame a debate on the merits of observing rules and the costs of violating them. More contemporary versions of this debate can be found in every geography across all eras. For all the constraints and limitations that rules impose on players, compliance, following the rules, and its appearance are extremely valuable in international relations. Serial violators are given little credit even when they comply, while a player who only occasionally acts as a disruptor can justify a deviation. In many ways, this is the difference between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The importance of adhering to international law, agreements, and understandings is not a theoretical debate. Powerful nations are quite understandably hesitant to invite the judgment of others when it comes to its options and interests. This could be the case with India as it grows in power and stature. Nevertheless, the value of being seen as a rule-following and responsible player cannot be underestimated. Places where this value can be clearly observed is in the world being far more trusting of the nuclear aspirations of India than that of Pakistan. This continues as both countries seek membership of key technology export control regimes. When it comes to maritime claims, India's acceptance of an arbitral award in Bangladesh's favor in 2014 stands in contrast to what happened with the South China Sea one in 2016. Playing by the rules is at the heart of the games nations play with each other. Understanding the mindset of others is key to assessing how far they will go and from what they will shrink. The strength of an unorthodox player is in making accurate judgments about the likely responses of the orthodox and rule-bound player. While they themselves are indulging in unrestrained actions, their tactic involves holding the other side to higher standards. Arbitraging or using this gap gives them a great edge. The final exchange between the rival brothers Karna and Arjuna is an example of this predicament. So too are the final moments of the Kaurava prince Duryodhana. Both Karna and Duryodhana expect the competitors to adhere to values they themselves have disregarded. Quote, much of Shri Krishna's relevance to the Pandavas is his contribution to resolving these dilemmas and addressing the situations when rules stop being a rule. End quote. In our modern world, open societies have to face such challenges when going up against less than honorable competitors. To fight the uneven fight is their karma. An extreme situation is that of fighting terrorism, especially when backed by state powers. Like other players have discovered before, there are no easy answers. Look at the diplomatic engagement between India and Pakistan over the last 2 decades. Pakistan indulges in nuclear fear-mongering to create a moral equivalence between a terrorist and a victim of terrorism. India then makes the mistake of playing along at Havana and Sharm el-Sheikh. In this situation, strategic restraint applies only to the victim, not to the perpetrator. Quote, in fact, a narrative was even created that suggests that there are no escalatory dangers when Pakistan commits terrorism, but only when India responds to such acts. End quote. What is amazing is how many have bought this self-serving logic, hook, line and sinker, expecting India to conform to it. It has been a challenge to make them change this perception and hold Pakistan accountable as well. Quote, the value of the Uri and Balakot responses was that finally Indian policy could think for itself rather than let Pakistan condition its answers. And that in many ways was the role of Shri Krishna as well on the Pandava side. End quote. While deviations from the norm are less rare, the role of deception is much more complex. It is impossible that activities undertaken in the realms of foreign policy and national security should be transparent in all respects. Incentives, fear, and manipulation are part of human nature after all. Indian strategic thought and most notably Acharya Kautilya's writings emphasize the importance of Sama, Dana, Danda and Bheda, alliance, compensation, force and trickery as ways of approaching political challenges. The complexity of the tactics used grows in direct proportion to the gravity of the situation. We see this in 2 of the ethically disputable situations contained in the Mahabharata. In a moment of battlefield desperation, the king Yudhishthira is persuaded to make a questionable public declaration with the purpose of destroying the morale of Dronacharya, an important opponent. When Arjuna's oath to kill an enemy by a deadline is tested, Shri Krishna creates an illusion of safety that encourages Jayadratha, the warrior being hunted, to expose himself with fatal consequences. In both these situations, the letter of the action violated its spirit. Far more overt situations have transpired in real life. Bosworth Field in England, Sekigahara in Japan, or Plassey in India have all been decided by treachery. Deception has even been justified sometimes as a call of honor. the Japanese saga of the 47 Ronin being an example. Despite all this, the world does not seek conformity with the rules and promotes observance of norms. It is for this reason that Japan sought to formally declare war just before attacking Pearl Harbor, so that it was morally and technically in the right. Its failure to do so before the attack began helped President Roosevelt in mobilizing political support. Narratives are necessary to justify departures and violations. Each political culture produces its own version of this. The British are probably the best in the business. Quote, their storyline on India can go to the extent of suggesting that oppression was in the interest of the victim. Other players have chosen their own mix of intentions and justifications. Retaining the moral high ground is in many ways the ultimate test of realpolitik. By its very definition, strategic deception is a high-stakes enterprise that requires a certain mindset to succeed. It usually involves large number of players and longer timelines to execute, and is difficult to carry out without considerable internal discipline. In the Mahabharata, the Kauravas attempted thrice against the Pandavas, in seeking to drown Bhima, in attempting to burn the Pandavas in a house of lac, and in inviting Yudhishthira to play a rigged game of dice. The correlation between statism and strategic deception in the modern world cannot be disregarded. Authoritarian societies are naturally more skilled in this domain. Statism is a political system in which the state has substantial centralized control over social and economic affairs. While democracies may not be incompetent in this area, they do require strong and well-integrated establishments to practice it effectively. Western experience on this topic shows that such initiatives are easier to initiate and implement when there is unity of purpose. Russia, Yugoslavia, Libya, or Syria. Much has been done that is seldom spoken of by Western officials. In stark contrast to this, the debate on Iraq that brought the skeletons tumbling out of the closet was extremely divisive. Something similar can be observed when it comes to the Afghanistan strategy. Among India's challenges is its sense of an establishment not being fully developed. Competitive politics is so visceral in nature that the only continuity to be found is that those who sit on the opposition benches can be counted on to oppose. This makes reconciling the gaps between narratives and intent that much harder. The one society that has elevated dissimulation or concealment to the highest level of statecraft is China. FYI, we are still on the point of strategic concealment. Its virtues are highly praised in the Three Kingdoms epic, where many of the decisive encounters are won through trickery rather than force. The 36 stratagems found in the Book of Qi is more proof of how deeply such approaches have seeped into popular Chinese thinking. Deceiving the heavens to cross the ocean, making a sound in the east to then strike west, decking trees with false blossoms, or the empty fort strategy are among its most well-known aphorisms. Unlike India, there is neither guilt nor doubt in dissembling, concealing. In fact, it is glorified as an art. Some analysts have suggested that China has relied on its cultural attributes to help in its extraordinary rise. In contrast to China, India has struggled even with the gap between declared policy and actual objectives. In the 1950s, it was difficult for India to sustain the messaging of Asian brotherhood with China while preparing to defend the borders against them. In Pakistan's case, the nostalgia of a partition people, "hum log ek hi hai," has continuously clashed with the reality of Pakistan being an obsessive adversary. In Sri Lanka, the mandate of peacekeeping ran into the eventual application of force. running a dual-track policy narrative where the actual goals are at odds or inconsistent with stated positions is challenging in a world where contradictions are publicly questioned. To overcome this and execute strategic deception successfully, an elite that is cohesive or that functions in a more unified way is needed. Quote, "Those constrained by their inabilities can only take comfort in the reputational advantages that they inadvertently enjoy." End quote. This is how you diplomatically say, if you can't drop a pair and build capability, have fun living off the accidental advantages your reputation provides. In the Mahabharata, among the critical players who are undercredited for their role are the Trigarta warriors, led by Sushrama, who hail from the region called Punjab today. They are traditional allies of the Kurus who develop a special enmity towards Arjuna. Arjuna having defeated them when grounds for Yudhishthira's coronation ceremony were being prepared. Their uncompromising hostility proving costly to the Pandavas. Adding fuel to the Kaurava fire, they collaborate in the effort to smoke the Pandavas out from the Virat kingdom during their period of exile. The most damaging consequence, however, is their challenge of a fight to the death to Arjuna, which diverts him away from the main battlefield. This challenge being made to help in a Kaurava attempt to capture Arjuna's brother Yudhishthira alive. While Arjuna does triumph, this diversion leads to the death of his son Abhimanyu, who stands alone in resisting the Kaurava effort. The lesson here is in understanding the danger posed by smaller adversaries whose single-mindedness goes to the extent of destroying themselves to inflict damage. The potential grief such opponents can cause, even if not as self-destructive as the Trigarta warriors, should not be underestimated. An example is the Sindhu king Jayadratha. After experiencing a bruising experience with the Pandavas earlier on, he acquires the capability to take on the Pandava brothers minus Arjuna. The consequences of this is that he single-handedly blocks all the support Abhimanyu expects once Abhimanyu enters the Chakravyuh, the spinning wheel formation. In reality, such competitors are rare but are deserving of special attention once they become a fact of life. This, in many ways, sums up the problem of Pakistan for India. Pakistan has gone to extremes since 1971 to hurt India, even if it suffers from the corrosion caused by the forces used. This is an allusion to the terrorists Pakistan nurtures turning on Pakistan itself. India cannot replicate Arjuna's solutions, but it needs to draw appropriate lessons from those solutions. Strategic clarity about Pakistan is a good starting point. The deep-seated feelings of such an adversary must be recognized. At the same time, we cannot choose our neighbors, much the same way relatives could not be chosen in the Mahabharata. So, how does India navigate such a dilemma? There is no one-time fix. No Indian response should be judged by this impossible yardstick. As a result, India will have to come up with its own set of answers. One answer is ensuring there are no guarantees of protection for terrorists. Another is enforcing accountability for acts of terrorism. In this process, it is important to remember that the naive expectation of engagement by itself being a solution is unrealistic. The remedy for such behavior can never be a process. Pakistan's refusal to tolerate or allow normal trade or connectivity should tell India much of its actual intentions. A practical response to such a posture is to inflict institutional damage and make the position difficult to sustain for Pakistan. Now for my favorite burn of the chapter. Quote, Pakistan can only be treated as a normal neighbor when its behavior corresponds to one. Till then, India will have to show a mix of fortitude, creativity and perseverance of a degree that would impress even Arjuna. End quote. This is the diplomatic way of saying, Bhai, teri औकात क्या है? oof. Indecision, inability to make a decision. Ambivalence, having mixed feelings. And detachment, being disinterested. Each extracts a cost. You can find examples for these in the Mahabharata. Rukmi of Vidarbha is a notable warrior who overestimates his value to both sides. As a result, he ends up being accepted by neither side and has to stay out of the war. Indecision. Shalya, the maternal uncle of the Pandavas, is tricked by a false flag operation into fighting for the Kaurava side. Deception is a double-edged sword, however. His mixed feelings have the effect of undermining the morale of the Kaurava general Karna, for whom he is the charioteer at a critical battle. Ambivalence. Balarama, Shri Krishna's brother, is genuinely neutral as he has taught warfare to both sides. He opts out of taking part in the conflict by going on a long pilgrimage during the war. When he returns, he is angered by its outcome but is unable to influence it in any way. Detachment. For a country like India that has hedged on the big global divides, these examples discussed is closely connected or is appropriate to contemporary politics. Hedging is a strategy aimed at controlling or limiting risk for the country. India's non-alignment policy has shown different sides of itself at various times, projecting some combinations of these situations. Where we chose to remain uninvolved, we were nevertheless left to face the consequences. On certain questions, we run the risk of displeasing all parties. Where we align on larger contradictions, our reluctance in doing so fully has not been without costs. Even if it took the 2003 invasion of Iraq to bring it into the consciousness of the current generation, regime change has been in practice since states have existed. The term carries negative connotations because of its weak justification and messy consequences. Despite this, the practice has been usually justified on ethical grounds. The example of this in the Mahabharata is the killing of King Jarasandha of Magdha at the insistence of Shri Krishna. His removal is necessary to put down an immediate challenge as well as clearing the way for the ascension of Yudhishthira as emperor. From Shri Krishna's viewpoint, it is also a settlement of a long-standing score. What is important to note in this, however, is the reason for the removal. The release of 98 princes unjustly detained by Jarasandha. It was presented as a situation of imminent danger as he was threatening to sacrifice them when the number reached 100. This example also shows the value of South-South cooperation, a coming together against a dominant force. Helping the weak and vulnerable has great value in collective politics. Just as important, a national goal was achieved in the name of global good. Since they are violative of sovereignty, regime change tends to be among the more controversial aspects of international relations. If it must be done, however, it is best achieved through an ethical explanation that has credibility. This may have been the case in the example we discussed, but in examples like Iraq, this explanation isn't as convincing. Leveraging the external environment or using the external environment to its maximum advantage is the other side of the regime change coin. In this, the weaker player obtains or manipulates stronger forces into working to their advantage. In the Mahabharata, there exists no shortage of examples. Bear in mind that the military balance was 7-11 against the Pandavas. The very gods are invoked to acquire powerful weapons and unconventional capabilities. Building and maintaining alliances, accessing technology, and utilizing knowledge of others are effective avenues of influence. This is particularly the case when up against stronger opponents, something India today needs to give more thought to. In strengthening comprehensive national power, India should avoid neglecting the skill to tap into the influence and power of others. Modern history is full of examples of powers who failed in this regard. One example is the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm II that saw its poor diplomacy undermine a favorable power balance. Such skills are not just the requirement of a weak or upwardly mobile power, but also of the powerful who wish to retain their constituencies of support and discourage collective reaction. Learning from your mistakes so as to not repeat them is an associated skill. One of the great ironies of the Mahabharata is that the same Yudhishthira who loses his kingdom in a game of dice becomes sufficiently skilled as to make it his employment later under King Virat. The area where the Pandavas constantly outscored their cousins was in shaping and controlling the narrative. Ethical positioning as the good guys was at the heart of a superior branding. Quote, through acts of valor, nobility and generosity, they generally came out as the better side. Admittedly, they were victims on many occasions, but their ability to play victim was no less. Their very upbringing in the forest gives them a head start with public opinion. The attempt to kill them in the house of lac shows them as an injured party. Accepting an unfair partition of the kingdom fortifies that image. Successfully executing a startup kingdom in Indraprastha adds to their luster. The abominable treatment of their wife Draupadi gives them a casus belli that is never allowed to be dampened. The master stroke was to make an offer of reasonable settlement and accepting just 5 towns on the eve of the war so that peer opinion shifts in their favor. End quote. Casus belli is an act or an event that either provokes or is used to justify a war. There is broad correlation in occupying the moral high ground and shaping the narrative. This is why the US and the USSR argued so vigorously over who was the good guy during the Cold War. The US stressed democracy, personal freedoms, and market economy. The USSR emphasized social justice, common good, and collective welfare. China, in its ascent, relied on promoting its peaceful character and highlighted the larger prosperity implications of its rise. Developing nations improved their bargaining position by making a persuasive case for positive discrimination in a range of activities. The Western world and the European Union reinvented themselves by championing global issues and stressing their responsibility to protect. The rise of economic populism and narrower interests mean that this is in retreat today. China will soon grapple with dealing with more universal challenges. The US is going in the opposite direction, diluting its alliance commitments and going back on international obligations. Given the times are defined by strong national identities, India too will have to take a call on its narratives. It cannot afford to be left without a message given its population and economic size. In the past, when India was a weaker power, comfort was found in group mentality and non-involvement. This will become increasingly harder as time ticks on. An underlying theme found in the Mahabharata is balance of power. Solidarity among the kingdoms is explained by kinship, which itself is often an outcome of state interests. 2 examples are that of the Panchala and Matsya kingdoms, who are natural allies of the Pandavas. Stressful situations are helpful in revealing inherent leanings. The Pandavas identify friendly kingdoms when planning to hide out in the 13th year of their exile. When planning the elimination, Shri Krishna highlights Jarasandha's closeness to the Kauravas as well as the allied kingdoms who would be weakened by his elimination. Quote, in many ways, the battle lines in the Kurukshetra battlefield bring out the intricacies of a very complex matrix. End quote. In the present day, the intuitive feel for creating and maintaining balances has diminished in India. A variety of factors discourage a deep dive into world politics that is necessary for this exercise. As limitations on Indian capacities, military, economic, technological, are removed, confidence will improve. India's current reservation on balance of power stems from the degeneration into uncontrolled competition that defined the period leading up to the world wars. Additionally, the Cold War created rigidities which minimized the importance of such possibilities. When the Cold War ended, belief in globalization and interdependence diluted the need for balance of power. All of this is now changing in an era of greater nationalism and flatter landscapes, the playing field being more level for competitors and diluted alliances. The move towards realpolitik brings up the costs and justification of policy prescriptions. The minister states that though Abhimanyu's death was tragic, in the larger scheme of things, it was quote-unquote collateral damage in an effort to secure his king. Collateral damage is the death or injury inflicted on someone other than the intended target. His grandmother Kunti replaced her own family with a set of guests before setting the house of Lak on fire. The sacrifice of Arjuna's son Iravan as a price to be paid for victory when the war started. The death of Ghatotkacha to Karna's unstoppable Shakti weapon, preventing its possible use against his uncle Arjuna. National interest has operational costs, and making those decisions is often the most difficult responsibility of leadership. When it comes to integration, the Pandavas are an excellent example. They are born of different mothers and each of them has a complex paternal origin. Yet they function well as a team and overcome internal tensions. They have complementary skill sets that make their combination effective. Looked at as a model, the Pandavas should inspire greater debate on the difficulties in working together efficiently. India faces this problem as a result of being blessed by both social pluralism and extreme individualism. Limited administrative reform drives the need for further integration. Jointness, coordination, and sharing are challenges that accompany this. They deal with set habits, vested interests, and distinct identities. Agreeing at a broader level seldom means things working out on the ground. Some of this may be conscious, but also a result of history and experience pulling in opposite directions. Building better capabilities and breaking silos is as close as one can come to a silver bullet in the field of policy implementation. India's reputation for operating with less than ideal coordination is because coordination came at a great cost. Individualism can be aggravated by a possessiveness which has been enhanced by shortages. Bureaucratism has become entrenched in our society. Focus on process rather than concern over outcomes has added to this problem. Only by attacking the lack of integration in all its forms can Indian foreign policy change for the better. The Mahabharata is a story of approaches and choices whose collective impact propels society in a certain direction. Each of these holds a lesson for the current times. The Kauravas push competition to its extreme limits, creating a backlash that even justifies the emulation or mirroring of their terrible tactics. In contrast, the Pandavas build brand and display strategic patience. As a result, they are able to defeat a superior adversary, at least in part by the use of asymmetric tactics. Karna represents alliance discipline at its best, highlighting the impact of polarization. Bhishma and Drona may stand with the establishment, but their ambivalence cost their side dearly. This is in contrast to Drupada, whose single-mindedness bolsters his value as an ally. The Trigarta, as noted earlier, are its more extreme version. Shalya, Balarama and Rukma are on the spectrum of non-alignment to non-involvement. And as for Kunti, her emotional commitments do not mean an unwillingness to pay the operational costs of success. Shri Krishna is the determining factor in all of this. He understands the big picture, comes up with a strategy and provides tactical solutions at decisive moments. Whether structural changes, shaping sentiments, enhancing brand or creating narratives, he sets the direction. In bringing down Jarasandha, he is able to ensure a more favorable balance of power. He helps swing opinion in favor of the Pandavas through his presence and advice. By looking like a reasonable power through diplomatic overtures, he is able to make his side look like the injured party. He is motivator and justifier in key moments such as the killings of Jayadratha, Karna or Duryodhana. He is also an advocate of restraint to the Pandavas, encouraging them to bide their time and acquire the necessary capabilities for an inevitable conflict. He is the voice of reason, word of caution and call to action as and when required. He shows the pathway when others flounder. He does the right thing with full responsibility. I leave you with the minister's words. Quote, the Mahabharata is as much a tale of ethics as of power. It is Sri Krishna's choices that reconcile these two imperatives. As Indians prepare for greater contributions, they must rely on their own traditions to equip them in facing a tumultuous world. That is certainly possible in an India that is now more Bharat. As we make our choices in a world of all against all, it is time to come up with our own answers. Being an ethical power is one aspect of the India way. End quote. Well, that's all folks. Thank you for taking the time to see my video through. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.